Hi, welcome everyone to another episode of Build Canada Live. I'm Lucy Hargreaves. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Build Canada. And I'm so excited to welcome to the show today Ryan Manucha, who is one of Canada's leading interprovincial trade barrier experts. He is frequently called on to advise governments and agencies. His words and work have been featured in prominent Canadian publications and journals like the Globe and Mail, the National Post, the Hill Times, and the New York Times. He's written a book on interprovincial free trade called Booze, Cigarettes, and Constitutional Dust-Ups, Canada's Quest for Interprovincial Free Trade, and also which won the Donner Prize for Best in Canadian Public Policy Writing. His solutions-focused research is routinely published by Canada's leading think tanks, and he's currently a research fellow at the C.D. Howe Institute. So welcome, Ryan.
Thank you so much, Lucy. It's awesome to be here.
Great to have you. Let's dive in. I mean, you are, like, from the time that we met a few months back, you have just sort of like oozed this passion for interprovincial trade in Canada. It's a very timely passion to have. So the stars seem to have aligned for you. And you've become one of Canada's leading experts on this topic. So I'm curious first, just to dive in a little bit more on your origin story, what first drew you to the issue? And like, was there a particular moment where you realized like this is what you wanted to work on for your life?
It was in the late 2010s. I was studying international trade, and all of a sudden, a dispute arose between British Columbia and Alberta. Alberta wanting to get more bitumen out to the coast, BC saying no, and then in response, Alberta saying, okay, well, we won't sell your wine in our liquor stores. And I just saw this occur. I was like, oh my God, like I've been studying international trade disputes between, Canada and South Korea or US. But we have a dispute going on domestically within Canada, and then how is this even possible? So you start pulling the thread back, and then you stumble upon the amazing story of Gerard Comeau, who, retiree from Tracadie-Sheila, New Brunswick, back in 2012, drives the 2 hours he did quarterly to pick up cheaper beer on the other side of the Quebec-New Brunswick border. Comes back, gets detained, fined, and his booze confiscated. And again, for the very Canadian fault of having brought too much liquor back from another province. He had 12 cases. The limit then was 12 beers. And so for me, it was pulling back this thread of this internal trade structure we'd gotten ourselves into. How could this be possible domestically when this is the concept we think about when we bring back Bordeaux wine bottles from a trip to France. How is this applying? And so then started to dive into the weeds and understand how, Canada is an incredible federation, right? Second largest country by landmass. But to keep that together, you've got to have local control and autonomy. So how do you bridge the two? And that's where the past number of years have been for me is wading through that balance.
Can you help people understand what's really at stake here? Like when we talk about trade barriers between provinces, like what does that mean for our GDP, our productivity, or even the price of goods that Canadians buy every day?
I want to sort of step back and say, what is a trade barrier? Go to pre-Confederation Canada to the railway mania. A railway gauge is the distance between the two lines of the two rebar on a rail track. And in the Maritimes, it was 4 foot 8 inches. And in Upper and Lower Canada, it was increasingly, they took the broad gauge, 5 foot 6 inches, which meant that at intercolonial borders, these train operators were having to shift payloads from one type of train to the other because they weren't compatible on those two types of tracks. And that was an issue to do with standards between two then colonies, right? Internal trade barriers are about the movement of goods, people, and the regulatory clash between provinces. And I've co-authored a paper where we estimate under the most robust models up to $200 billion a year, 7.9% growth to the GDP. But even if people say that's too rosy, even if they say it's actually 50 billion, 100 billion, I think there's arguments to suggest it's 300 billion because the model doesn't capture the dynamic knock-on effects of bringing best-in-class knowledge across provincial borders. That's well worth it. Talk about ROI, Lucy. I mean, you know this better than most. When you talk about, well, what was the input? What was the cost to achieve 50? I think it could be north of 200, but the economic numbers suggest 200. That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, even if it was 50% of that 7.9%, like that's still a massive boost in our GDP, especially given in the latest budget, GDP projections over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years are still hovering between 1 and like maybe 2% on an upside scenario. And that's just not going to get us where we need to be as a country.
Yeah, and when Carney goes and shakes hands with the ASEAN nations and makes trade deals with Indonesia, we didn't demand to know what the return on investment was going to be from stronger free trade with Indonesia. We didn't say, well, what's the numbers to justify this action? But all of a sudden, when it comes to the internal trade debate, we start demanding numbers and say, what's it worth? It's like, well, how can you have one and not the other? And I mean, we put numbers on the table. We think we can go, Lucy, I appreciate up north, south of those numbers, but none of these involve flying to Indonesia, Mar-a-Lago, London. It's all domestic.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, I mean, from a sovereignty perspective, super important. Also from, even if you're thinking about like environmental impacts and climate impacts of shipping goods long distances, there's a lot of like different arguments and different angles you could take as to why breaking down those barriers is just so important. Even national unity, I would say, like we are such a big country, coast to coast to coast. Like what better way to help unite us than to make it easier for British Columbians to buy products from Quebec in a seamless and cheaper way than they can buy products from Indonesia.
Oh yeah, and when we're talking about major projects office initiatives that are going to require the built environment where you need tons of labor, right? You need small, medium-sized businesses and individual workers to be able to compete and bid on subs that relate to the MPO initiatives, right? And if you have, 13 autarky labor markets, you're only harming yourself, right? A lot of no one cares about when it comes to, I'll give you an example, like interprovincial trucking barriers, right? The patchwork nature increasing the costs by 8.3% to freight rates, $1.6 billion hindrance to the Canadian economy. What are the trade barriers when I talk about when we talk about trucking? It's varying driver qualifications for long combination vehicles, different definitions of sunrise and sunset. And sure, there are reasons perhaps for them to exist, right? I don't like to think regulators are not malicious individuals who want the worst for the Canadian economy. They regulate in the best interests of Canadians. But we've also seen there's a study that came up by Stats Canada between 2006 and 2021, the regulatory burden on industry had increased by 37%, increased by 2.1% per year in that stretch, right? And we talk about that's just the burden on industry. It's not even talking about the burden because the way that regulations have augmented amongst the provinces and territories is different. So it's probably even worse than 37% because it's when the clash comes between two jurisdictions that you have an internal trade barrier.
Yeah. Let's pivot to sort of like analysis. I think you and I could just nerd out on this topic for hours and hours, but for our listeners, they might want to kind of understand, well, like what are we doing about it? How do we understand the problem more, and like how can we tackle it? And I'd like to just spend a little bit of time talking about the internal trade barrier tracker that you partnered on with Build Canada. This is just such a great example of how the Build Canada community kind of like saw the civic issue. We mobilized some, leading engineering talent from across this country who are Build Canada volunteers and members of our community. And they partnered with you, who is a subject matter expert in this topic, and we developed this tracker. I would love for you to kind of tell the story from your perspective and talk a little bit about why that was such a major unlock in the policy space.
It was insane, and credit goes to a number of people. Amanda Rose for making some certain connections between me, Vass and Amanda, and then connecting me to Melody and then to Marty. And within like a month, we had built Canada's first ever tracker of internal trade agreements. Like this is something that has never been done before. We've never had quasi real-time lens into the state of internal trade, right? And how we're doing benchmarked against our commitments based on, Canadians became very, very familiar with seeing their provincial leaders standing almost as if they were foreign leaders with one another, signing MOUs. And so there was a lot of cluttering in the mind space, like, okay, we're doing things. Are we doing things? Where do things stand? And Build Canada, like within a matter of weeks, was able to stand up the most sophisticated tool to give Canadians back that control and power and lens into what is happening on the state of internal trade. And so credit goes to the entire community to Build Canada support. And this is sort of emblematic of the power of Build Canada in being able to inform the policy discourse and advance it, and also put things under a spotlight and show to those policymakers, hey, people care about this. People are watching. So we have this incredible means of evaluating performance that we didn't have before. And it's meant to be contributive. It's not meant to be hostile or adversarial to the policymaking process. It's meant to be value add, contributive, and enhance, because the internal trade community, the regulators who advance the file, doing a tremendous amount of work, which also needs to be seen in a way, right? Like what has been done. It takes to get interprovincial trucking fixed in Nova Scotia. It took 7 different line ministries, an insane amount of collaboration over the course of a month, and they managed to get a number of different vehicle combinations and commercial vehicles moving through Nova Scotia once again, right? That is the kind of ingenuity that should be spotlighted and sort of attested to. And so the tracker, an incredible opportunity for Canada.
Yeah, I think a common thread that I see through Build Canada projects like this and Canada Spends and our sort of outcomes tracker and promise trackers that we have created is really about, in many ways, making the policy process and the policy making process and the decision making process just more transparent and accessible to people who care about democracy. They care about the direction of the country. They want to see progress and growth, but they just don't spend their days thinking about these issues or diving into them. And so what we're trying to do through this tracker and other projects is really just cut through that noise and the complexity and help make those issues just much more digestible and understandable for everyday Canadians.
hmm And there's a lot of great policy institutes who sort of, monitor internal trade. I think about like, the CFI, the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses, produces an annual report card. And I think it's part of a broader sort of ecosystem. But the Build Canada tracker is completely unique and sort of a game changer in that it is alive, real time, and the power of the technical expertise within the Build Canada volunteer base means that you can visualize and express ideas and sentiments and modify in real time as you go in a way that maps onto the nuances and the facts of the file. And that's what's like a complete game changer for the Canadian policy landscape.
So what surprised you most as you sort of like, as this tracker came together and you started to see sort of the state of play and what progress had been made and where we were still lagging behind a little bit? Curious to get your take on not only what surprised you, but also what the tracker reveals about where the biggest bottlenecks still are.
I think so on the tracker itself, I was so shocked with the pace of development and how we were able to sort of like break things and do things and iterate really quickly in the interest of advancing something that was actually highly valuable. Like I expected that initiative when we first started talking about it to take months, if not years, and it was done in like less than a month. It was and we did not sacrifice on quality or substance one iota. It was just the passion that came through from everyone involved. On the internal trade file itself, we're leading into what I think is going to be the most consequential meeting of the pan-Canadian ministers of internal trade. So every province and territory and the federal government has a sort of a minister of internal trade, or internal trade is part of their portfolio. And it's happening up in Yellowknife on November 19th. And the Build Canada tracker is going to be the means by which we can convey the progress of this meeting. This meeting is the one where we actually put the finger on the pulse and we say, is the patient still alive? Is there still progress, right? The communique readout is going to be vital. And the way that this gets sort of translated to Canadians is going to be through the Build Canada tracker, right? That's the means by which and sort of the commentary around it, because Build Canada is built to be able to sort of harness developments in real time without sacrificing quality and communicate things and express things in a way that matter to Canadians. Substantively, I'm expecting to see an announcement on mutual recognition of goods. We're supposed to see sort of the culmination of this by the end of the year. The idea that if a good was certified for use or sale in one province, that should be good enough for another province. And I'm expecting to see, the advancement of the same thing with labor. Everyone has So when I go and break my leg, Lucy, in Jasper, in Alberta, I don't ask for a medevac back to Ontario. There's something inherent about doctors in Alberta I trust. The idea is like when I drive into Quebec from Ontario, I don't get stopped for a quick roadside test. My driving license from Ontario is recognized, mutually recognized by Quebec. It's imbuing that same concept of mutual recognition across the rest of our economy. And I'm expecting to see the enshrinement of the 30-day standard for the first time in Canadian history. It's already been enshrined as like as a mandate, but actually seeing that implemented and seeing that announced through the course of November 19th.
If someone were to open up the tracker today, what would they see? The last time I checked, it was 11 out of 33 barriers had been kind of removed, or there had been an agreement signed between provinces. Is that sort of still where we're at today?
Next time, so I am hoping that, again, the pulse is going to be checked on November 19th. I am hoping that the pan-Canadian leadership on internal trade sets the bar even higher for themselves for the next 12 to 24 months. It's got to match the level of ambition that we saw in the budget. I am very hopeful that we start to see a number of new initiatives, net new, so that, the success rate will go down according to the tracker, but that's because the internal trade ministers are challenging our internal trade infrastructure to go even farther and faster, right? We saw them do a mutual recognition pilot project on interprovincial trucking. I would love to see them say, let's do the same thing, curated around manufacturing, curated around resources extraction, right? When we talk about trade barriers, you can talk about an individual one in isolation, like occupational health safety. What does that mean? It's like, like the fall safety guidelines might be different between two provinces. So if I send my work crew from one province to another, they may need to spend a week or two recertifying under the new fall protection regime. That could be my entire margin, my entire profit
Yeah.
margin. And I'd say, okay, well, I won't even bid or compete on that project, right? So occupational health safety leads towards something that we care about, like more housing, more building. Major projects office initiatives. So I would love to see them run a narrative around a singular vertical that impacts every Canadian.
Just to play the devil's advocate here, you said 12 to 24 months. And when I hear timelines like that, like I just am thinking, why would it take 12 to 24 months to eliminate trade barriers on, workplace fall standards, as an example? Like that just, or, we can maybe insert other examples there too. But for that one, let's maybe just talk about that. Like, why wouldn't, like, fall standards are fall standards. If you fall in a workplace in New Brunswick, I think we have enough research and data and information to know what the safety standards should be. Like, why would it take 12 to 24 months to agree on that? Like, that just seems crazy. What am I missing here?
Yeah. It has to do with how the regulatory process works and the individuals involved in changing their provincial or territorial rule book, right? And they have to have the confidence that if they change the way of doing things, problems and harms and the public interest won't fall out at the wayside, won't get harmed in the process, right? And so the regulatory process is slow because it's trying. I firmly believe that those involved in it want the protection of the public, want the protection of the consumer, and so there is this natural inclination to move slowly, so there is no harm, there's no accidents. But it's about so that's why it takes longer than one might hope. It's about this process of two things: gaining trust in how business and how fall protection is done elsewhere. That's what mutual recognition is. It's a forcing function. So my big push is on spreading mutual recognition far and wide. And the Australians did it in the 90s, the Europeans a decade before that. It's a forcing function so that regulators have to engage with one another, understand how things are done on the other side of a provincial border, and say, oh, you know what? I get how you guys do it. That's good enough for us, right? You have the fall protection your fall protection. I understand how you're doing it, what your objectives are, that it actually satisfies our needs. Good enough. And it takes time. It's trust building. Someone's going to stick their neck out and say, we're going to change the way of doing things. Oh, and by the way, Minister, no one's going to get hurt. That is very fearsome moment for someone to stake a claim on that. And quite frankly, within government, no one gets rewarded in that scenario. There's no upside on that. And so that's why it may work slower than we'd hoped. But I'm here for the continuous trust building exercise. And honestly, People love monopolies. Like Canada loves monopolies, and the senior deputy governor of the Bank of Canada finally declared for the public that Canada has an oligopoly problem with the banking system, right? And when you have a monopoly, you don't like to lose it. And so many regulators and many professional licensing body accreditate, like I'm thinking about the colleges,
Hmm.
have regulatory monopolies, and it's hard for them to lose those. So it takes time to break those down, change the paradigm. And I know it's frustrating; it doesn't work as fast as we'd like, but I agree with you. Gravity works the same way it does in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. So what's
Yeah.
the difference, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like a big part is, a big part of this is political will. I'd love actually to see the federal government just like take more leadership here. And I know some of the stuff is just, it's within provincial jurisdiction, but I know there are tools that the federal government could use to sort of force the issue in some cases. And maybe it won't get to that point, but I think more political will across the board would be helpful. I do also worry a little bit that some of these conversations are being used as bargaining chips for broader conversations with the federal government around, bigger picture items like health transfers and social transfers. And there's some probably quid pro quo conversations happening behind the scenes, which could extend timelines. So yeah, I would love for people just to be focused on the outcomes and the results and, like do the work to unlock this as quickly as possible. I'm curious from your perspective, like when you see the areas where we still need to make progress, are there specific sectors that stand out to you or specific provinces that stand out to you as like major sticking points? Like not to point fingers here, but just curious, like if you see any trends or is it just sort of more across the board where we just generally need to just move faster?
Well, on your first point, I think it would be, I keep pushing for this. I think the Competition Bureau, which is Canada's police watchdog for anti-competitive behavior, should be given powers over internal trade, right? Competition, we have a productivity and prosperity issue. That is sort of in part solved by competitive intensity, and competitive intensity is hindered by internal trade. It's like this virtuous like circle
Yeah.
there. And so if you have the competition watchdog whose bread and butter is to police anti-competitive behaviors, I mean, corporate fiefdoms, but they also understand how, you can sort of play this game at the Constitution gives enough room for 13 individual autarkies. We don't want that, right?
Yeah.
So having an institution who every 5 years, like in Australia, like Australia's Productivity Commission, every 5 years releases a report on the state of internal trade, and it's a guiding, forward-looking document on things that can be done to sustain the momentum, to point fingers, to identify problem areas, and to be able to say this needs to be tackled. And at 5 year cadence is incredible. Australia, when they twinned on the back of twinning internal market reform and national competition policy in the 90s, they saw a 3.5% boost to the GDP, permanent boost. Like these are real numbers, and we've seen it tried in a country very, very similar to Canada. In terms of within Canada, I have to say, Ontario released some incredible legislation, as of right legislation, which essentially says if you come into this province and you're of a certain sort of occupation, the default is that you can continue to immediately practice in your profession, even if you don't have official sanction from your regulatory body. What we need is the breakdown of these regulatory monopolies over labor, because we are very much a service-based economy, yeah? And we're a 40 million person economy. We build things, we build products, but we're more about the services and being able to have an efficient allocation of resources and the disciplining of firms. And Lucy, you see it in other fields too, like the Canadian why do we care about productivity and competitive intensity? It's because we care about the Canadian way of life and our ability to build wealth and sustain stability and our democratic institutions. They're all tethered together. And so internal trade is part of that conversation. It's not the only thing, but it is a huge part of that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, really, at our core, and historically, Canada is a trading nation. That is literally the reason Canada was founded, was because of trade and the trade routes that were established here and the partnerships that were established between Canada's founding peoples. And I think we would all be better off as a country if, A, we remind ourselves of that, remind ourselves that being commercial is in our nature, and it is a great thing. Canadians are entrepreneurs, they are innovators, they are builders, and being commercial should be not only celebrated, but we should do more to change our structures and our policies and our laws to help all Canadians do that better and do that more and do it more efficiently. And so I see the internal trade barrier conversation as like part of that overall narrative of like, how can we just make smart decisions as a country to not only like benefit our GDP and grow our economy, but also just be true to who we are as a country. Like, we are a country founded on trade. That is our history. And we need to get back to that. And we need to do trade with each other in a much easier way and in a much bigger way, and just need to stop being our own worst enemy in many cases.
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, you're part of a community of builders who are doing things perhaps in not so much the built environment. And internal trade absolutely has, think about some, and so for that, like the alignment on a singular standard of the USB-C, right? Like at the dawn of Confederation, we had our colonies running around with different sort of currencies, even, right? Imagine we had a Canada where Ontario and Quebec and Nova Scotia, we all had different currencies. There's a certain alignment, regulatory alignment that is required to be able to have competitive. Because if we have fiefdoms where, oh, you can become the best in class in province A or territory A, what is that like? And that's all you can't, because you can't break into the next province.
Right. You're
A
just
good
limiting
luck if
your
you're trying to
market
break in
share.
internationally. Hmm?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're limiting your market share from the get-go with something
And
like
you
that.
can't, how do you expect to be able to compete internationally too? Like,
Yeah.
we want to build champions.
Okay. Fast forward 3 years, maybe 2 years. I don't want to say 5 years because that seems like way too long to actually tackle this problem. So I'm going to say 2 years. Fast forward 2 years. What does success look like in your mind? And we'll make this the last question.
Success looks like we have comprehensive mutual recognition across the board. We have bolstered this, so we have bolstered manufacturing, construction. We've created jobs because it's easier for people to work on other provincial borders, for firms to flourish. More concretely, I hope the Competition Bureau is able to be an active participant in the internal trade discourse, and I hope that we have institutions like Build Canada continuing to shine the spotlight on the progress and call out the slowness and say, well, if it's slowing down, why is it slowing down? What is the challenge? What's in your language? What's the blocker, and how can we go through this blocker? Is my hope.
Great. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Ryan. Really appreciate your time today, and it was a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. This is great.
Awesome.